Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rockey here with Father Boniface. And Father, in our last episode, we were talking about ultimately figuring out our priorities of becoming closer to God and to know Him. And one of the things that you mentioned was there can be some challenges in communicating with Him, praying correctly. And I wanted to just have a thought here, a question um, about how to set ourselves in preparation of prayer. Because we talk about ourselves in preparation for various sacraments. You know, before your marriage, you go through marriage training, you make sure that you're pure of heart, you actually know what you're signing up for and you want to do this. You know, for communion, you make sure that you're in a place where you're able to receive communion. You know, you are at the mass, you're not in a state of serious sin. You know, for confession, you think about your sins. You know, I can go through them all. But ultimately, every sacrament is a form of prayer at the end of the day. So I wanted to back it up to take it from, aside from just the big sacramental moments, how do we prepare ourselves for, lack of coming up with a better way of saying this, regular prayer? How should we prepare ourselves to get the most out of this? Because you outlined some of the easy challenges we can get into for not being in a good prayerful state. And part of this is my brain is always trying to make things more efficient. And typically, if you start in with the right starting point, you get better results. You know, that's why they sell three different kinds of gas at the pump. So with that being said, I wanted to start with that kind of notion about how do we prepare ourselves for regular prayer. And if that's the wrong terminology, please correct me, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say.
Well, it might, we haven't talked about my new book, have we?
I don't believe so, but it's a great chance to do it. Setting you up and didn't even realize it.
The Hidden Power of Silence in the Mass. I can just recommend that. We could probably take several episodes to talk about different aspects of silence in the Mass. But the answer to your question is related to the first. So in the book, I talk about 5 different movements of silence in the Mass. Silence of preparation, first of all. Silence of listening, encounter, second of all. Third of all, a silence of offering, sacrifice. And then a silence of adoration and communion, and then a silence of savoring. So those sort of tracks through the various movements in the Mass. But the first silence is related to your question about prayer, the silence of preparation. And in addition to that silence, cultivating that interior space for encountering God, which we want to do in prayer, and we certainly want to do also in our personal participation in the Mass. Another thing about regular prayer is we can help to prepare ourselves by our location. So by entering into, if you're sitting at your desk, your body wants to work. If you're sitting in the chapel, your body wants to pray. Now, sometimes you want to pray at your desk and sometimes you want to work in the chapel. But anyway, by and large, you can utilize the muscle memory, you might say, what your body does in terms of habits. When habits require a trigger, something that's going to notify your body that it needs to start engaging a pattern. And that pattern of movements is going to be determined at least partly by location. Posture is another thing. I really like praying sitting cross-legged. I don't know how that developed. It sort of happened over time. I'd rather sit on the floor cross-legged than anything else. Now, that's not the only way that I pray, but that's very comfortable. And that's the only time I ever do that. And so that's a posture that's comfortable for me for a long period of time and moves me interiorly to a place of awareness of God and things like that. But so posture and place make a difference. And then also related to my book, how you create space inside of yourself. So when you turn the external noise off, what starts happening inside of you? A lot of things start bubbling up, we could say. A lot of thoughts and feelings, and then we'll be running off this way and running off that way. And so just learning how to still our hearts and to create space for encounter, for listening, is a really important initial movement in prayer. I'm really talking about the beginning of prayer time. We could even dial that back a little bit farther if you wanted to, but at the beginning of prayer time, just giving yourself space to transition from the world. Our interior tends to be a bit like a snow globe that's shaken up. There's like a lot of little snowflakes floating around in there, a lot of noise, a lot of thoughts, a lot of feelings, a lot of stuff. And when we stop, we become very aware of all of the snow. And then we might be tempted to think of like, how do I get that snow to stop? You just have to hold still. It's really the only way to settle down our interior, is to not keep shaking the thing. Stop shaking it. Just let it settle. And so giving ourselves some space for that transition, and settling also looks like concretely anchoring ourselves against something else. So in our last episode, we discussed that beautiful verse from 1 John chapter 3, verse 2. We could start with, beloved, we are God's children now. And it might just be a little verse like that. Beloved, we are God's children now. And as I say that, it's bringing me into a mental transition. And then I'm also simplifying my interior. So it's I'm not running off with a lot of thoughts. I'm just saying very simply, beloved, we are God's children now, inside of myself. And that simple verse, again, is meaningful. It's Christian. It connects me with him, but it's not complicated. It's not going to send me in 15 different directions. So I'm just kind of grounding my interior. And we can also do simple things like breathing, taking a couple of deep breaths, breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth, several, 3, 4 times. You can think breathing in the Holy Spirit, breathing out the thoughts of the world that have gotten in me. Anyway, however you want to do that, that can be very helpful, just to sort of settle our bodies. So we are embodied creatures and our bodies matter. And so they can help us or they can interfere with us. And we want to help them to help us, we might say, as much as we can. So that sort of simple interior settling techniques, giving ourselves some time. So in my book, I talk about the value of getting to Mass early. Get there 10 minutes early, 15 minutes early. Give yourself the space to transition into the sacred environment, away from the noisy, secular environment. It doesn't happen like a light switch. We need time to transition into a new space. And so having a little bit of extra time. And likewise, at the beginning of our prayer time, if we're only planning to pray for 5 minutes, it's just not enough. It takes time to transition, takes time to settle. And then, we're trying to remove, again, internal noise by just sort of holding still and having maybe a simple point to reflect on, to repeat inside of us. And then we want to make sure to reduce external noise. Even if there is going to be noise, make it at a distance, sort of like you and I do for a podcast. You got your little guy making noise, but he's 3 rooms away behind a couple of doors, and it's easier to leave that to your wife at that point and not feel like you need to run to his rescue or that he's breaking into the podcast. So similarly with prayer, we want to put noise at a little bit of a distance, close the door, eliminate the distractions. And that's where we might want to put our phone on do not disturb, so that we're not getting buzzed and beeped and whatever else, called and texted, and finding other ways to just limit the amount of stimulus that we're allowing in during those times of prayer. So anyway, those are a few. I just gave you a load of things that are, again, they're fairly obvious if we think about them. And we think about the things that interfere with prayer, and we think about the things that help with prayer. And then just ask the question, well, how do I move into a place that interiorly I can be more prepared to be settled and to listen to the Lord and be open with him?
Well, they're fairly obvious when you've already figured out the solution to the problem. As most solutions tend to be when you look back at them and figure out how you got there. But that's because you can draw a linear route of solution. Many of us are going out like a a ring coming out from like a spider web effect. Maybe it's going in the right direction, but there's 359 degrees of wrongness. Now, maybe some of us are going to have to realize at least I'm going completely in the wrong section and eliminate 90 degrees of the failure zone. But there's still lots of room for exploring ideas that may or may not be a good solution, let alone efficient. This to point that out there. So a lot of this coming into being is there's also, you're using the example of observing the snow around us, not trying to change the snow, just acknowledging that it's here and preparing ourselves to actually be one with it, I guess is part of your solution there. And I think that you hit upon one of the starting point solutions that people will give as a societal thing about saying why prayer doesn't work, because it feels like I'm just shouting into the wind and nothing ever happens. And you basically just gave the answer of how to avoid that problem. Like, yes, it can be a problem if you're not prepared for it. If the only time you ever try to do your prayer life is when you're under immense stress and you're engulfed in the stress, and you're just like, please help, please help, please help, in the form of your prayer, that's not entering into a prayerful state. So it's not to say that it doesn't count per se, but the answer that I got from there was you're not doing it right. And if you would do it right, you would get much, much more out of it. Is that a fair synopsis of what you're trying to articulate here?
Yeah, you made a comment in our last episode about how you don't have concrete measures for holiness like you do for a baseball game. And that's because we don't have concrete measures for any relationship. So nobody has a scorecard for their relationships. And I think similar kinds of things happen in terms of prayer. It's like, what are the things you do to enter more deeply into relationships? If you want to wreck your marriage, bring your phone into every conversation, leave it on and put it in between you. So again, that's why I say obvious in the sense of not that everybody would have figured it out, but if you think about it, you think about it in relational terms. What are the ways that we prepare for other relationships? And setting aside, again, in a similar way, if you bring your work into every conversation with your wife, your marriage is not going to last for very long. If you can't set aside other things, and then that doesn't happen instantaneously. Now, it happens a little bit more easily with your wife because there's a lot more sensory stimulation. She's a real person with a real, God is also a real person, but she's a visible person with an audible voice and a tangible presence. And that's entering into our sensory input in a way that has, seizes our attention a bit more. But I was just listening to Jordan Peterson. He was talking about how attention is a moral decision. So what we give our attention to is, part of our morality, and which makes a lot of sense once you say it, but I wouldn't have thought to say it that way myself. So, giving your full attention to your wife, it's a moral decision. Giving half your attention to your wife is also a moral decision. Giving your full attention to God, and then we're going to do that by preparing in similar ways. Sometimes if you think again about a relationship, it can be helped when you enter into a conversation and you already have a little bit of an agenda. I know what I want to pray with. I know what I want to talk with my wife about. I know I already have some plan. Now, the conversation may take me in a different direction, but I'm coming in with something, and that can help to kind of direct attention, direct focus.
Yes, and you think about that, it's, well, how do we go about and just take that last sentence you said there about, or last concept about morality, your choices are morality, about how you spend your time, what you put your attention on. And so much of us is, there's systems that we put in place. I know that this is a place of prayer, this is a posture of work. And we become systematized whether we realize it or not. And how do we step back and address what those systems are to make it better? You don't become, morbidly obese on one loaf of bread. You become it upon a lifetime system of eating carbs over and over again, or eating sugar, whatever the case might be. Likewise, you don't become you don't become, Wayne Gretzky, using the discussion from before, just by waking up one day and saying, I want to do this. There's a lifetime, a system of practice and skating and all that other stuff. And I think that you gave us a lot of good things to look at. So looking at what is my system that I am putting attention towards. When I am caught into relationships and something is going wrong, what is that actual mechanism that's kicking on, whether it be physically or inside your head, that is deviating you from taking this in the direction that you would want to do? And as you said, having an agenda, a thought process of what an ideal outcome would be is a good thing. And thinking that through is phenomenal. So, you said, Father, I really appreciate the conversation here. And I want to give you a chance to say if there's any last thoughts about the preparation of prayer, needing to put ourselves in a state of silence, that we can take with us going into the following week.
Well, you'll find a lot more in chapter 2 in the book, The Hidden Power of Silence in the Mass, a guide for encountering Christ in the liturgy. Sincerely, in terms of some mental, imaginative exercises, in terms of some concrete ways to settle the noise in our hearts, in terms of ways that we can prepare our environment a little bit better, or give ourselves times for transition into the sacred space from the secular. All of those things are very helpful. And then I think the basic thing is kind of what you just alluded to. It's like, well, pay attention to what's happening. If it's going well, like, do more of that. And if it's not going well, do less of that, or find some other adjustment. There are limits to that. You don't want to constantly change everything every time, but just a little bit of self-awareness and sort of noting what's working, what's not, does a lot of good. So just paying attention to it is helpful. And if you have more specific questions, you can email Joe and we'll talk about it on the podcast.
Yes, the email address is fatherandjoe@gmail.com. Very basic. Fatherandjoe@gmail.com. We look forward to speaking with you. We'll be again here with you next week.